Hey guys, Chris with Coalition Gaming here, and if you're wondering how to build a more repeatable budget gaming computer, I got it all here for you. Stay with me. So let's get started over here. We have an HP Z400 motherboard. Really good thing with this motherboard, it's an X58 socket 1366 build. Can take any i7 from that generation, but more importantly, really cheap Xeons that fit in there. What we went with for this build is a Xeon W3565, aka the i7-960. 3.2 gigahertz, I believe, is the base clock, and it goes up to 3.4 gigahertz max turbo. That processor was only $7.50. The Z400 motherboard was $36.99 on eBay, and it wasn't the only one that was that price. So these two are really easy to get for good prices on eBay, and a lot of Xeons for the socket. For the RAM, we went with 8 gigabyte, two 4 gigabyte sticks. Now you can get about 8 gigabytes for around $50 on eBay, especially because this, especially if you use a Xeon, supports ECC memory. Here's the thing though, make sure you order the right memory. This platform does not support registered DIMMs, aka UDIMMs, aka if you're looking at the speeds on eBay and it says PC3 10800R, that R at the end means don't buy it. It has to be a U at the end or no letter at all, or possibly an E, no R. We have a TF120 case fan. This is a brand new purchase. This is about $11. That was from, I believe, Newegg. And really good case fan, but there's a reason I'm going with the PWM fan for this, and that's because the Z400 motherboard requires a PWM fan on the rear chassis header, and that will get rid of one of the issues that it will have that you get from pulling it out of its regular old workstation case. For the power supply, we have a Thermaltake white Smart 5400. I think it's 80 white rated, and 500 watts, that'll be plenty for this system, especially if you're going with a more modern graphics card. 500 watts, this thing was about $38 on Amazon. So you get your shipping quick, and it's a really good price for the what you're getting on it. Brand new. For storage, we have a 2 terabyte Toshiba hard drive. Again, not that expensive. I believe this was about $58.99. Pretty good price for the gigabytes that you're getting. To go with that, we have a 128 gigabyte boot SSD, which is about, I believe, $40. Maybe you can find them even cheaper than that nowadays. For cooling, we have the Gamax from Deepcool. This is the Gamax 300 3 heat pipe cooler. It just clips right in, really easy to install. One of the better ones that you can get. If you want to see more on that, you can check out the video linked right up here. Now, the graphics card is where we have the one-time deal sort of thing going on. This I got for $70 on Craigslist. If you wanted to see the benchmarks of this one versus like a GT 1030, it'll be linked right up here. And so something to talk about with that is $70 to $100 is about the correct price range for a 960 nowadays. And if it's a 4 gigabyte 960, you might see $100 to $110 for the price. That's okay still, because it performs nearly to the levels of a 1050 Ti. But a 2 gigabyte 960 should be less than $100. So if you're okay with getting used parts, getting a used graphics card, a 960 will probably be the best bang for the buck that you can do, especially because it has lower power requirements than something similarly priced you might find like a GTX 770. Those use a lot of power. This is probably a smarter buy for a system like this with only 500 watt power supply. But if you don't want to get a used part and you want to pay around that much for a graphics card, a GT 1030 is what you're going to be looking for. And those are around $80-ish. For some lighting, we got a $5 red LED strip. That's going to add at least a little bit of style to this build. And that pretty much rounds it out. The case here that you see is a Corsair Carbide Spec 02 $50 case, really nice setup. Already comes with the red LED fan in the front. Can't wait to get everything inside. Let's get going. So I'm going to install the cooler here real quick, but you might not be able to see it from there. We'll get a shot. That what's happening is that this cooler has a on the motherboard is a 5-pin header, and that 5-pin header, the 5th pin on this motherboard determines whether it's a high power processor or not, and it will throttle it if it's not. So you have to trick it, because a stock HP cooler for this motherboard doesn't actually fit when you take it outside of its case. So there we go, that's installed nice and tight now. So what you have to do with that 5th pin, and let me show you guys real quick, that 5th pin is on the header right here. I don't know if you can see it. That 5th pin right there just needs to be grounded out. So we're gonna be putting a wire on it once it's already in the case, and that wire is just gonna rat out to the back of the case to a grounding point. It's that simple. Alrighty, so this is an adapter to make this motherboard work with any standard ATX power supply. Now, I made this one because I was short on time. However, there'll be a link in the description below to the one that you can buy. It's a $15 adapter. Really makes this a lot more plug and play because, well, maybe not everyone can cut and solder. So let's go ahead and get this power supply in. So one thing that I find really cool about this case is the way that it holds SSDs. They're just little slot-in trays, which is, again, I think this is really neat. There you go. So as pretty as the build might look now, adding the power cables in and all the other cabling is going to uglify it a little bit, but it's what gives it its character. So ketchup and mustard cables aside, let's get all this wired in and organized, I guess. So time to add some style. Get the LED strip installed here, attached. It's going to be going through this little channel right here and then routed in through the cables through the drive bay. So let's peel this guy. Something to say for this motherboard, because it's coming from an OEM HP Z400 case, those cases have all the connectors in them to make these run and boot without error. Now taking it out of that and putting it in here, the way it is now, it will always hit you with a press F1 to boot error on boot up. You can just press F1 and it goes right into Windows and it works 100% normal after that. But if you want a nice clean boot, turn it on and it goes right to Windows, you're gonna need to do a few tricks, and that's grounding the sense pins that are on the ones causing the F1 to boot error, and that's the 5th pin on the CPU power or the CPU fan header. And let's see, that's really the main one, because the other one, front panel audio, it's pin 7 on there. But if you don't plan on using the front panel audio, then you don't need to do this step. You can just turn it off in the BIOS. So if there are any other devices in the BIOS throwing errors after you plug this stuff in, you go to BIOS, mark it as hidden, problem solve, clean boot to Windows. Now you can get these cables from your own case, or if you happen to have another case, I pulled these from another case. They're the front panel connectors. They can go on a single pin because that's all you need. But because this motherboard only really has accommodations for a power switch, that's all you need. You just plug into the header for the power switch. You got the other cables left over, so you can use your own case that you're working on, pull some cables off, snip them, strip the ends, route them to the back of the case, grounded, problem solved. So this is the pin on the CPU, the sense pin on the CPU header that you got to ground out. So let's get this this connector on it. There we go. So one thing when it comes to grounding is it's pretty important that you go to bare metal. So this is the screw hole that I'm going to use to route this wire to ground that out. And well, I'm just going to scrape the paint away a little bit, and then the screw goes right in. So one last thing to worry about here that you want to get taken care of so you can boot cleanly is, you see this little yellow USB header? The pins that this jumper is on, they just need to be jumped together, and any little jumper like this, so you can find them online anywhere at the back on old parts and old computers, in the back of old disk drives. These little jumpers, just slide it over those 2 pins. Again, information on what to jump, what to put this sort of stuff on, the ground wires, the jumpers, and all that. That will be available in the link in the description below. Very easy to follow. Well, I guess it's a moment of truth. Let's check this out. Hey, life. So booting up, we get the HP boot screen. There is an option to disable this, so we'll probably do that, so then you won't even know it's an HP. But I'm going to go ahead and unpause the boot, and you'll see that it's going to run into errors, the F1 to boot errors that I may have mentioned. Alright, okay, so when you're in BIOS, you go over to security, then you go to device security. And in device security, you see all the different options that you can, all the different devices you can mark as hidden. And I'm going to go over to the splash screen. I think it's post messages, and I want to enable post messages. I believe that's the one, so I can just see the regular splash screen. And well, then here we go. Something else to do though is make sure like stuff like hyper threading is enabled and all cores are active and all that, but you know, nothing crazy. Let's save the changes and boot. I have my flash drive with Windows plugged in right now, so it should just go straight to loading that. So, build complete. I think it came out pretty good, all things considered. Time for the benchmarks. All benchmarks are running on a 1680 by 1050 monitor. This is very close of 1080p, so it should be representative of that. Pretty spot on, I imagine. So, let's start off with Cinebench R15. We have a multi-core score of 509, a single core score of 103. Pretty respectable scores for a processor of this era. Firestrike, we have an overall score of 6209, a graphics score of 7220, and a physics score of 7973. Now on to the games. PUBG with an optimized medium configuration, we have an average FPS of 67.8, a 1% low of 21.5, and a 0.1% low of 2.7. Needless to say, the performance of PUBG actually surprised me, because for the most part, it played pretty smoothly, pretty well, to be honest. Battlefield 1 on a medium setting with a 64-player match. Average FPS was 55.8, 1% low of 30.2, and a 0.1% low of 18.8. That 1% low is really nice because it sort of signifies that the game pretty much always ran smoothly without issue. And the average FPS on a medium setting for this graphics card and the setup turns out pretty good, I imagine. Overwatch on a high setting, average FPS was 128.7, 1% low of 68.6, and 0.1% low of 6.2. Needless to say, this was very smooth and a very great experience, especially on a high setting. Ghost Recon Wildlands, canned benchmark on a low preset. This had an average FPS of 67.5, 1% low of 51.2, and a 0.1% low of 6.2. What was most surprising to me here, this being probably one of the most demanding games that we benchmarked, was that the 1% low stayed far above 30 FPS. So this game plays very smoothly on the low preset. What a surprise. Rainbow Six Siege, canned benchmark on the medium preset. This had an average FPS of 102.1 with a 1% low of 71, with a 0.1% low of 69.9. Now, for the 1% low and the 0.1% low scores to be so close to each other, it means that this game runs so smooth. And an average FPS of 102.1 means that everything about this game is smooth. So if you're into esports, gaming with this FPS shooter like Siege, you will be in good shape on a system like this. Fortnite on the high preset, average FPS of 81.3, 1% low of 48.9 with the 0.1% low of 16.9. That 1% low of 48.9 represents a really good smoothness factor in this game. That average of 81.3 means you're going to be having a good time with this game on a pretty high graphics setting. Really nice. So there you have it. Xeon W3565 and a GTX 960 with 8 gigs of RAM. Pretty good performance, don't you think? The benchmarks speak for themselves. Anyways, if you like this video, click that like button. If you had any other questions on anything to do with this build, feel free to drop a comment. I'm happy to talk about it, answer any questions on that. Anything that advanced that I talk about with it, any product links, any stuff like that, that will be linked in the description below, as well as, like I said previously, all the diagrams and anything you may need to do to get this to work properly. It's not a lot of work. Trust me, just have a look at the diagrams and you'll see it's all pretty easy, especially with the power supply adapter, making life even easier with this thing. Make sure you tune into our weekly streams every Wednesday at 8 p.m. We have a merch store as well, so if you want any shirts and any hoodies, anything like that, that's all available in our merch store, also linked in the description below. Any support there helps us out, helps us keep doing budget builds, helps us keep doing all sorts of product reviews that we can do. Anything like that, we'd really appreciate it. We'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.